There are over 17,500 museums within the United States, welcoming over 850 million visitors each year. Did you ever wonder what goes on behind the scenes in museums, creating the displays and exhibits we all enjoy? Join us as we explore museums and their exhibits from the inside out. Hi, I'm Leslie Mueller. Welcome to Museum Access, the show that takes you behind the scenes at America's top museums. Today we're on Chicago's beautiful lakefront at the world-famous Adler Planetarium, America's first planetarium. Named after local businessman Max Adler, who considered it to be a classroom under the stars, and it really is, filled with hands-on exhibits that help us explore and understand the universe. Today, we're going to learn about America's first steps to the moon. We'll see artifacts from the personal collections of NASA astronauts, and we're going to get a behind-the-scenes peek at some rarely seen astronomical artifacts in the planetarium's private archives area. We've got a lot of space to cover, so let's take off.
Lift off, we're off on the hour.
Annie, thank you so much for letting us come and see the planetarium.
We're thrilled to have you here.
Tell me about the space that we're in right now.
Yeah, we're standing in our solar system gallery. This is really where you can learn and discover some of the objects that make up the neighborhood our planet lives in.
What's back here? Exploring Mars?
We have a life-size model of one of the rovers that is currently exploring Mars.
Wow, that's great. And did I hear that there was some alien in the area?
So you can actually touch a meteorite that came from our solar system. It is not from this planet. It's always really fun to kind of get up close and personal with an object that is truly otherworldly.
Oh, that is so great. And tell me about this Mission Moon.
Yeah, we're going to walk into Mission Moon in a little bit and really explore America's earliest adventures in space. So really traveling through America's quest to go to the moon through Captain Jim Lovell's experiences.
We have a lot to cover, don't we? Let's get moving. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you.
When the planetarium was founded in the late 1920s and it opened to the public in May 1930, the idea is that this wouldn't be just a venue for sky shows, so to speak. This was the very first modern planetarium in America. But the idea is that more than having the projector and the sky show dome, this will be a proper museum of astronomy.
So Pedro, where are we now?
We are right now in a very special part of the Adler Planetarium. We are in the Webster Institute for the History of Astronomy, which is our collections department. It's where we take care of our collection, where we study our collection, where we do research with it, and basically where we prepare the stories, the narratives that we tell our guests with these wonderful artifacts. We have a very special scientific instrument. This is the oldest. Yes, it's the oldest instrument in our collection.
Really?
It is a Persian astrolabe dated from the 12th century.
Okay, what's an astrolabe?
An astrolabe is essentially an analog computer. It's an instrument with which you could perform calculations and, for example, reckon time, find directions.
And would many people have an instrument like this, or would it be very commonly?
Probably not that many people, because of course an instrument of good quality would always be an expensive instrument.
I see.
We know that in this instrument there's an inscription saying that it belonged to a sultan.
Wow.
Could be the sultan using it, or someone, or the sultan's astrologer would be, of course, would be someone who would master the astronomy at the time, but also be able to perform astrological calculations and cast horoscopes. And of course, with an instrument like this, you could perform all of those functions, as I said, reckoning time, determining directions.
Well, I've had my eye on this ever since we walked up to the table. Tell me what this is. It's gorgeous,
this is a later instrument. This is from the 19th century. This is called a tellurium. And so, essentially, this is a model of the Sun Earth-Moon system. So here we have a candle, and the candle is here just to give an idea. We don't really, you normally don't
Let's light it.
light a candle, we don't do that, but it's here
burn
just
down the place,
precisely
yeah.
to show how the instrument will have been used. So you would light up the candle, and so you would have a sort of artificial sun. And then here you have the Earth, and you have the Moon. And there's a crank over here, and you can put
Oh,
the
look at
Earth and the
this.
Moon in motion.
Oh, I love
So
this.
you can see the motion of the Earth around the Sun, and you can see the rotation of the Earth, and you can see
So this is the
moon
sun,
moving-
or
that's
the moon rather,
that's the moon,
moving
so the
around
sun
the
is here.
Earth.
And this was a performance piece, and of course it was an educational instrument. So with an instrument like this, you could explain basic concepts of astronomy. So you could explain, for example, the phases of the moon. You could explain what a solar eclipse is, what a lunar eclipse is. So you could explain why do we have day and night.
Wow.
You could explain what is 1 year, etc. So here we have an 18th century reflecting telescope. So in this type of telescope, the light is collected by mirror, which is placed on this side of the tube, and then there's a secondary mirror over here, which redirects the light towards the eyepiece. So
I see.
you would look through
Here, okay. Is it
and-
heavy?
Well, it's not that heavy, but of course you would want to have a stand like
support,
this so that
yeah.
the instrument could remain stable. And maybe elegant society of the 18th century would use an instrument like this to show the heavens and to discuss natural philosophy. So this kind of telescope, this kind of instrument, a reflecting telescope, was actually very popular in the 18th century, and it represents the willingness in a certain sophisticated society
Sure,
to,
yeah,
learn
to learn,
about science
yeah.
and to learn about nature.
And this is painted, it looks like, right? Is that painted
We
wood
believe
around
this
it?
was
or-
a later change. So normally,
Oh, interesting.
these telescopes will come with a shiny brass tube.
Okay.
This probably testifies to a change in taste. So you see, this looks pretty much like the marble paper. Sometimes you get to
It does,
see
which was very
in,
popular then,
book
yeah.
binding. So certainly, it was not just meant to be scientific instrument
Sure.
used to carry out observations of the celestial bodies, but it was also a beautiful decorative
It's
piece.
beautiful.
Can't talk about going to the moon without talking about Captain Jim Lovell.
Everybody knows that name, don't they?
He is synonymous with going to space. He's been on 4 space missions, including Apollo 13.
Well, it's wonderful to come into the Adler Planetarium and be greeted by this wonderful sculpture behind us. So what is he doing? Is he giving the thumbs up sign?
He's actually using the Earth in his thumb to position the spacecraft to get safely back to Earth. So the Earth is framed inside that window, and he's using his thumb to really make sure that they stay center on it. And that's really helping them get back home.
He's just lining up his
He's
thumb with
physically
Earth,
lining
and that's
it up.
guiding.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
56 hours into that flight, there's an explosion that cripples that spacecraft. So a lot of their electrical went down, and so they really needed to use some old-fashioned navigation to get back home. So it really starts with the Mercury program and the Mercury 7 astronauts.
Oh yeah.
Captain Lovell actually was asked to apply to be one of America's first astronauts, but unfortunately he failed his physical and was not selected to be one of those astronauts, which was really crushing because he saw being an astronaut as being part of his fate.
And was he involved in this even as a child? Was he tinkering with space?
He was. He certainly was fascinated with Flash Gordon stories. World War II veterans were coming back, so he loved airplanes and he dreamt about becoming a rocket engineer.
Well, you have to remember when I was born. I was born in 1928, and the year before that, who flew across the ocean but
Lindbergh?
Charles
Yeah.
Lindbergh.
Oh.
And so all the young boys in the 30s, the early 30s, as they're growing up, it was aviation. Aviation was, read magazines and books and made model airplanes, and, pretended you were doing this and that, and I was one of them. But then sometime in high school, I ran across a little pamphlet that was written by a professor, Robert Goddard. He was a professor in Worcester, Mass, at a college there, and it was called A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes. another fellow of mine, we got together and built a rocket, but it was out of a mail tube, you know, and we put it
Like corrugated?
corrugated,
Yeah.
you know, that you wrap things up into.
Oh, yeah.
And we made our rocket fuel out of potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal.
How'd you even get those? Well, charcoal you could get.
Well,
but-
we got it actually from the school. We tried to get.
Did you borrow it?
We did a little bit of it, but what it turns out to be, this is how you make gunpowder. You mix these three ingredients together in a certain amount,
Ratio, yeah.
and it makes essentially gunpowder. But we packed it very tightly in this thing, hopefully, and we kind of knew this, and then use a little mixer to try to get it all together. And then we built our one and only, our rocket.
Your first and last rocket.
First and last one.
Yeah.
I went out in a large field, this fellow and I had a welder's helmet. You know what they look like, don't you? And for a fuse, we had a straw, regular straw, that we put the gunpowder in,
yeah.
or the rocket fuel, rather. And then I lit it and ran as fast as I
like
could.
heck. Yeah.
But so it wouldn't go too fast. And then it took off, got to about 80 feet.
Wow.
And then I guess the packing sort of gotten loosened a little bit, and it blew up. Came down in pieces.
Funny thing is, he sent it or blasted it off right next to a gas station.
Oh, God.
So not really the smartest.
Getting studied too much.
Yeah,
right?
gunpowder, fire, gas.
Oh my goodness.
But he jokes that nothing happened and everything was perfect.
Well, I know we've got a lot to see here, mission control and a space capsule,
Yeah,
so
I'm so excited
let's start.
to show that. Let's do this.
thanks.
So this is our recreation of the Gemini mission control. And we really wanted to highlight the team behind the astronauts here and really show that it took more than just one person to make these amazing accomplishments happen. In fact, we wanted to highlight several of the consoles where people would have sat and really supported the astronauts when they were in the capsules. So we tried to make this space super interactive, and we allowed our guests to pick up, or we created experiences for our guests to pick up the handheld phones and listen to the actual audio from that period in time.
Lane B undergo.
We may have had an instrumentation problem, Frank.
Roger. And we had a pretty large bank associated with the caution and warning there.
Talk about hands-on.
I know.
And ears on.
Right? Very, very cool. And you can listen to Jim Lovell talking to Neil Armstrong on the historic Gemini 8 mission, which is pretty fantastic.
This is wonderful. What a great opportunity for kids and adults to come in. I know your career at NASA started way before Apollo 13, so bring me back to the beginning.
Well, in the beginning, after I was selected by NASA, I left Virginia Beach, went to Houston, and met the other people. We were still in sort of secrecy at that time.
Sure.
I met them all at the place called the Rice Hotel. And finally, we settled down to where Ellington Air Force Base was. We all got certain jobs to do. Mine was to look at landing, the various landings in Apollo, the parachutes, and in Gemini, how landing and all that went with it. And over the time, after Wally went up, and then we had finally the last flight was, of course, Gordon Cooper, and we were there very much into Gemini at that time, and I was assigned eventually to Gemini 7. Gemini 7 was going to be a long duration flight. It was Frank Borman and myself, a 2-week mission to see if man could live in space for 2 weeks. It was a long flight. We had 23 medical experiments. And essentially what we learned was what Scott Kelly learned 50 years later by staying up in the International Space Station for a whole year. One is that you lose tone in your leg muscles
That I
tremendously.
believe, sure, yeah.
And we found that out when we started to walk across the carrier deck after 2 weeks. We also discovered that our heart rate slowed down because you don't need the heart to be pumping as fast in zero gravity as you do in gravity.
Gemini 12 was more than just taking care of your everyday functions. They did some extraordinary things like going on spacewalks, and we have displayed there the EVA plan, so that Captain Lovell used that while Buzz Aldrin went out on his spacewalk, so just help them know what was going on. In addition to the Gemini 12 flight plan, which has Captain Lovell's handwritten notes in them.
The actual flight plan.
The actual flight plan with his notes in it, and you can see things scribbled out and crossed off, which is
That's
pretty fantastic.
wonderful. So I'm assuming this is the crown jewel of the
Yes.
Adler Planetarium.
Yes, we are standing right next to the Gemini 12 spacecraft. This carried 2 astronauts, Captain Lovell and Buzz Aldrin, for 4 days.
And the capsule's much smaller than I thought.
It is cramped quarters, so we always had to tell kids to imagine going 4 days in a small compact car with their brother or sister and not having the ability to get out or away, just to understand how cramped and how close you really got to your colleague.
Well, and having seen the flight log, and I mean, they're having to look at paperwork, they're having to do things. It's not just...
They are working non-stop.
Wow.
So even their rest and breakfasts or meals are scheduled in. So it's a regimented process where they're just constantly doing, which is pretty fantastic and awesome to think about.
And so on Gemini 12, he accomplished about 5.5 hours outside the spacecraft in three EVA periods, and we solved that major problem, which was one of the last ones to go to the moon, because in case we couldn't dock around the moon, they had to go outside to go over to the command module to dock.
So we're standing right by the Gemini 12 heat shield. This heat shield protected the 2 astronauts from temperatures up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh my gosh. It looks like splattered paint. Was it
It
like peeling off as they were coming into the
as
atmosphere?
they're re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, they're coming in at such high temperatures that there is, it looks like it's been burnt away.
It does. It's like
does.
deteriorated.
It does, and you can see where they've actually sort of impacted the Earth's atmosphere. It's not dead center, it's sort of on the lower left side of the heat shield. So, and you can see where a lot of the scorching really happened as they came in, again, at such extreme temperatures.
Now let's move forward to Apollo 13.
Okay.
People are so familiar with Apollo 13 here in the United States and around the world. And it seemed on that week in April that everything was going smoothly, and I'm sure you were prepared and not scared. I'm not going to ask if you were scared, because I'm sure as a professional, fear probably didn't come into the picture. But walk me through blast off and just what was happening as you launched.
Well, you know, things happen before blast off. Years before the flight, a damaged liquid oxygen tank was installed in the spacecraft. It was
Unknowingly.
accidentally dropped at the factory. They thought that they had made sure it was okay, but it was delayed in delivery. It was originally assigned to Apollo 10. Because it was delayed, they scratched off the 10 and put Apollo 13. 2 weeks before the flight, we did the last test of the spacecraft. We call it a countdown demonstration test. It was sitting on top of the unfueled booster, the Saturn V, but it had everything in it, all the liquid oxygen, all the helium and everything like that. And we counted down to 0. We want to make sure that in sequence, all the things in the spacecraft came on. Internal power, oxygen started flowing to the spacecraft for the fuel cells and the pressurization and things like that. Everything worked perfect. Guidance system came on, everything was fine. And after that was done, now this is 2 weeks from the flight, a ground crew went in to remove that liquid oxygen from the 2 tanks. But when they tried to remove it from the damaged tank, they could not do it, because that part of testing the spacecraft, testing the fuel cell when it was dropped, was not done. They could not remove the liquid oxygen. But they knew the tank had a little heater in it. And that little heater had a thermostat that protected it from getting overheated. But the spacecraft flew at 28-volt power. That little thermostat was designed to work with just 28 power. But the ground crew put in 65-volt power to turn on the heater to boil off the liquid oxygen, thinking that this tank had a thermostat that would be compatible with their power that was on the base. But the original Apollo 13 tanks had that higher voltage thermostat, but it ended up on Apollo 10, and we had Apollo 10's tanks
Damaged
that
one.
did not have it.
Aye.
So we thoroughly damaged the tank unknowingly.
Sure.
All the oxygen was removed. Why it didn't blow, we never knew. But the tank was really severely damaged. All the wires inside that tank were exposed. That was 2 weeks before the flight. 4 days before the flight, discovered that the entire crew had been exposed to the measles. Well, Fred Hayes and I had the measles. We were sort of immune to them. Ken Manley, the third pilot, never had the measles. And so just 4 days before the flight, we substituted Ken for Jack Swikert.
You know, it's amazing that the training is such that substitutes can take place that close to a launch, or is that a little unnerving?
We were amazed too, because the last 2 months, Jack didn't have much training. And in fact, the last month, we gave him the responsibility of taking care of the hotel rooms, and getting the banquet ready, and all that, taking care of the people that were coming down. Well, the flight took off on April 11th, 1970, at 13:13 Central Standard Time.
Oh.
Kind of wondered, we should have thought about that. It took off. The first stage of this big Saturn V worked fine, but on the second stage, 2 minutes and 13 seconds before it should have, the center engine shut down.
That engine 5?
On the second stage, it was center engine 5. There was 5 engines shut down. And we, of course, we knew it shut down, and we were going into Earth orbit first before we would go to the moon. And we said, do we have enough power? Do we have enough, fuel now, because we're going to have to burn longer? 4 engines. Can we go to the moon? Well, it turned out we could, and we got into Earth orbit. And then we came around and we lit the engine to go all the way on a long elliptical orbit that goes around the Earth at 40,000 miles and goes way out at 240,000 miles. Everything was fine, but on April 13th, the tank blew. And consequently, from then on, it was one of survival.
Well, and it takes a village, doesn't it? I mean, this gets into problem solving.
That's
which is
exactly
really
right.
Basically what the whole program is. But I mean, you really all had to get into gear on that.
We did. We had a great mission control team. We had to figure out what went wrong, how to use the lunar module to get us home.
And was Ken Mattingly involved in that on
He was
Earth?
involved in that. He was supposed to get the measles. Of course, never got the measles. So he was part of the mission control team. And we had to figure out, number one, we were not on the proper course to get home safely. We had to use the lunar module control systems and their engine to make all the maneuvers. Command module was dead. We were, because there were 3 people instead of 2 in the lunar module, the carbon dioxide buildup through our own exhalation, and there was danger that we would be poisoned by our own exhalation, because carbon dioxide gets to be poisonous in larger concentrations, and we could tell it was building up, and we had sensors that could tell that, and so did the ground.
And there's enough power in the lunar module for?
We use batteries, not fuel cells, and we had to really take care of the power, so we had to shut everything down after a while, we had to figure out a way of getting around the moon and then coming home again, and then we had to finally figure out manually, because we had all the navigation system turned off, to use an emergency procedure which we had developed for Apollo 8, but had never had thought it, in fact, we thought it was useless, and we tore the procedure itself out of all the flight manuals, and so we didn't have it on 13, but I was on Apollo 8 and helped develop that procedure so we could use that for the final adjustment of our course to get back into the Earth's atmosphere at the proper angle to make a safe landing.
Well, on a more philosophical note, I have to ask you, when you are in orbit and you're looking back on Earth, does it kind of just put life, or has this whole experience put life in perspective for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'll give you some thoughts about looking back at the Earth. This really occurred on Apollo 8, the very first time. When we first looked at the Earth, and it's so small, and yet when I hit the Earth with my thumb, I recognized and realized, I should say, that I'm hiding 6 billion people, approximately 6 billion people, all around, all striving for the same things in life. And then I saw the Earth and its true perspective. I mean, with relationship to the sun and to the moon, it's in 3 dimensions and very small. And I realized, and you often hear the story, I hope to go to heaven when I die. I hope to. In reality, you go to heaven when you're born. Think about this now. You arrive on a planet of the proper mass that has the gravity to contain water and an atmosphere, the very essentials for life. Only planet in our solar system that has that particular circumstance to it. You arrive on a planet that's orbiting a star at just the proper distance, not too far out to be too cold or too close in to be too hot, but just the proper distance that the planet can absorb that energy from that star, that energy which caused life to evolve in the first place. God has really given us a stage upon which to perform. And how that play turns out is strictly up to us. Because that's what you look like when you're around the moon, just 240,000 miles away. Everything is happening back there. It's a stage where we're all given the opportunity to perform, but how it turns out is up to us.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, there you have it, the story of space exploration from the 12th century to present day. As scientist Robert Goddard once said, the dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow. I'm Leslie Mueller. Thanks for joining us on Museum Access, where every visit is an adventure.